Hello there, my name is David Caldicott, and in this video I'm going to talk about defense mechanisms, and more specifically how you can get to know your own defense mechanisms using a combination of internal and external tools, and then how you can get to work on removing those defense mechanisms, or at least reducing the power that they have over you. So I watched an amazing video on YouTube recently. I'll put a link to it in the description. It looked at Good Will Hunting, the film Good Will Hunting, from the perspective of the screenwriter, the screenplay. And in the video, it was discussed that the magic of Good Will Hunting, that moment, if you've seen the film, you know it, the "it's not your fault" moment, right? That's a powerful scene. And the reason it's so powerful is because the therapist, Robin Williams, has spent the film getting to know his client's protection mechanisms, getting to know what stages he goes through as he's trying to protect himself from a painful emotional truth. And in that scene, he just keeps saying, "It's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault." And at first you get nonchalance, you get, "Yeah, I know." Then he smiles and he says, "Yeah, I know." Then he gets serious and tries to assure him that he knows what he's talking about. "Yeah, I know, I know." Then he gets angry. "Stop it, I know." And then he finally surrenders. And in that surrender, they have a big hug. And in the screenplay, it's written beautifully that the camera zooms out and shows two lonely souls being father and son for each other. And it's a beautiful thing, beautiful thing. But anyway, great film. But the video talked about protection mechanisms. And it got me thinking about how the Caldicott Method and the process that you see on my channels is a process of confronting your protection mechanisms. And as you do the process, as you do the method, you get to know each of the defense mechanisms that you have, but you get to know them in a very visceral, real sense. It's not like an arbitrary thought in your head. It's not like you're thinking about the defense mechanism. You actually feel it. You actually feel the effect of it. So what I want to discuss in this video is where those protection mechanisms come from, how they manifest, and how you can work your way through them. So first of all, where do they come from? 9 times out of 10, a protection mechanism comes from between the ages of 0 and 7. So when you were a small child, that's when you learned most of your protection mechanisms. And those protection mechanisms were useful at a time when you had very little power, very little control over your environment, and you were just in an absorbing state. The ages between 0 and 7, you're pretty much 100% absorbing from the world, right? And you're creating, but you're creating only really in your imagination. And you've yet to learn the higher human faculties of how to turn imaginary things into real things. See my other video coming later about the difference between real and imaginary on a mathematical level. So in that early age, when you had to confront things that were unpleasant, that induced negative emotions, if an adult wasn't around to help you, to show you how to feel it, Alan Watts talks about how pain is easily solved by crying. Like when you cry, when you physically and emotionally engage with the pain, you cry it away. And if you don't get taught how to do that, then you try and use another mechanism. And crying and being sad and having the cathartic emotional release of feeling the tragedy of sadness and then letting it pass, that is a very powerful thing that not many people get taught when you're young. So if you didn't get taught that, then that natural way of dealing with pain gets corrupted, and you deal with the pain in another way, such as aggression, such as denial, such as making excuses or rationalizing. So during those 0 to 7 years of your life, you may have had some significant traumas happen, or you may have quite mild traumas. Whatever the trauma, a trauma is essentially just a break from safety in reality, a shattering of your sense of security and safety. So that can come with pain, emotional pain or physical pain. And if you're not taught how to deal with it, then your response is to put up a defense mechanism. Now, how do these things manifest later in our life? Well, once the protection mechanism is in place, say it happened at 5 years old, you discovered that at 5 years old, if you make a mistake and someone's upset with you, the only way to handle that is to get angry and accuse them of negative things, because that's what you were taught. Maybe you saw a parent do it, maybe you did it yourself, and that gave some relief from the tragedy of the moment. Well, when you're 6 years old and the same situation happens, you do it again. You use the protection mechanism. But this time maybe it's a little bit more complex. You do it again at 7, you do it again at 8, you do it again at 9, you do it again at 20, you do it again at 30. And each time you use the protection mechanism, it gets more sophisticated because you're aging, you're becoming more experienced and more grown up. So you become more talented, more skilled at using higher human faculties to enforce a protection mechanism of a child. And this is why it can seem so jarring and frustrating to people who love you, because they see that you are there's this whole narrative and this whole adult rationalization that gets added to what is in essence an inner child that is afraid to just feel the tragedy of whatever it's feeling, right? So one thing that I discovered very quickly when I started developing the Caldicott Method as a way for confronting these protection mechanisms is that you have to kind of go back in time through them. So let's say that right now your protection mechanism is showing up in your life in the form of your relationship with your loved one, or your relationship with your customers, or your relationship with someone important. And you're maybe coming into the Caldicott Method, you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're thinking, I can get some relief from this problem. I can remove the protection mechanism that is keeping me and my loved one from getting closer together. And you may think that you want to confront it on the adult, this is me now level. And what you'll find as you start practicing the Caldicott Method is that handling it here is like step 1, not step 1 of the method. We have a 7-step process. You see it in other videos, but let's call it position 1. Position 1 is your protection mechanism now. And then you have to handle it from 5 years ago. You have to handle it from 10 years ago. You have to handle each of the more complicated ways in which that protection mechanism has manifested. You have to nail each one in sequence. And this is why self-work can take time. Because you can't just go from today, skip back to the inner child, do some inner child healing, and expect the chasm in between to be bridged. That's not how this works. So if you want to get lasting, integrated progress forward, what you need to do is go through each age, each step, each trauma, each secondary effect of that original protection mechanism needs to be handled. And that's what you see when you watch a Caldicott Method demonstration of me, and when you practice it yourself. It's such a good idea to film it and then watch the video back, because you can see those protection mechanisms. And how do you see them? Well, most people, when they think of protection mechanisms, they think of one of two things. One, that it's an internal thought-based thing, or two, that it's a behavioral thing. So if someone does a particular behavior around another person, such as act in a hostile way, etc., but we want to go a little bit deeper, and we want to know that behavior is just a manifestation of the internal state. And the internal state is a combination of all of your fingers, all of your toes, all of your muscles, all of your organs, and your breath, and every aspect of your internal being. So with that in mind, what happens when you practice the Caldicott Method is that you bring the protection mechanisms to the surface without the behavior that's associated with them, because there's no one else in the room. It's just you practicing. Even if you're in a group retreat, there's other people in the room, but they're there for a support, but they're getting on with their own practice. So it's not us all together in a group, it's you, and the group is there. So there's no one else around for you to act out any of the behaviors of the protection mechanisms. And the way that the 7-step process works keeps you from thinking too much about it. Because again, the thought is just a manifestation of the original protection mechanism, a narrative that explains to you why you don't feel safe and why you have to put up the protection mechanism. The thought itself and the narrative surrounding the thought doesn't matter one bit. It doesn't matter one bit what you think about it. So what you're left with in the 7 steps is you're left with just you in the physical and emotional. And that is where you get to see the protection mechanisms in a new light. For instance, one protection mechanism that I have that you may see every now and then is licking my lips like that. That's one of them. And there's thousands. I've got thousands of them. So do you. And we don't have to get rid of all of them at the same time. But what we do, as we said, if there's a problem in your life now, what you do is you come into the method, you come into your session, holding in your mind, holding in your body, holding in your conscious intention that you're going to look at that issue, but very quickly not attaching yourself to the narrative of the issue, very quickly allowing your body to communicate with you about where that issue is coming from. And you notice the lip licking. And you invite your body to remember all of the times in your past where you've done that, or where you've been conscious of doing that thing. And you ask yourself, what are the effects in the external world of doing that thing? What's the outcome of that muscle getting tense? If you get a twitch in your shoulder when you're thinking about that problem, what's the outcome of that twitch? Does that tension in that shoulder, when you follow it through, when you go through step 3 and step 4 and you go into it, what does that keep you from doing? If it wasn't tense, if it wasn't freaking out, if it wasn't a physical manifestation of a protection mechanism, then what would that shoulder be doing in that moment? And how would your life be better if you did that more, right? So, take a breath. So just like in a movie, the main character of the story has to go through a journey in which they confront their protection mechanisms and tear down the walls, so to speak. This is exactly the same way that you do it within yourself. The only difference is that in the film, it's written by someone else, and in your film, it's written by you. For example, in the Good Will Hunting film, there are a number of characters in the film that contribute to him taking down his defense mechanisms. There's the girl he's dating, there's his close friends, there's his therapist, there's his teacher. Each of those people help him to realize something that allows him to release one level of his protection mechanisms. So in the same way, what we're doing in a Caldicott method is we are inviting the characters within ourselves to help us to remove the protection at each stage. So you don't have to wait until you've messed up a relationship with the woman and heard her tell you the things that you should have known, right? You don't have to wait for that. You can do it all within yourself when you view yourself as a democracy of being, which if you follow me, you know that we do. So during the session, as you do your 7 steps, you'll meet different characters within yourself, different characters that say different things to you as they try to help or hinder your progress towards lowering the defense mechanisms. And how do you tell whether they're helping or not? If they're helping, then they produce a little bit of relief, a little bit of catharsis. If they're not helping, then they make you more tense and they make you want to retreat and run away. So protection mechanisms are a really fascinating thing, and the Caldicott method has a way of bringing it all to the surface and just showing you it. So when you watch the videos of me doing it, you're going to see my ego coming in and saying, no, it's not safe to do this. And that's the point, because by letting my ego protect me from everything that it's afraid of in these sessions under controlled setting, where I am intentionally allowing that protection mechanism to come up, I then handle it. I then deal with it. I have the characters within me confront it and say, it's not your fault. Just let go. It's okay. And by doing that confrontation in private, in my space, it means that when you talk to me in real life, when I'm not on my own, when I'm with another human being, I come from my highest self. And it's very rare that I am pulled out of the moment from a fear. It's very rare that I get anxious. I used to really suffer from social anxiety. And now I don't. When I'm in a moment with someone, I'm just fully present with them. It's like David Caldicott doesn't exist anymore. And I think there's a sense of that when I make videos too, that I'm not attached to my ego when I make these videos. I'm just presenting whatever is channeling through. I don't script it. I don't plan it. I'd have a loose intention and I say, I'm going to discuss this topic and see where it heads. The magic of video is that you can edit out the parts where the ego takes over. But you'll notice from my videos that there's not that much editing, compared to some other YouTubers that edit every 10 seconds. There's a cut, Ask yourself what happened in between that cut. Which part of them came in as a thought or a worry that said, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to show the real me, right? Now, the problem is the thought itself, so they edit out the thought itself, but that's the purpose of doing this method, is that you edit yourself, you edit your ego out of your public presence when you're with other people, other universes. You're present with them because your defense mechanisms are chill. It's not that you get rid of them, they're still there, but they're relaxed because they know that you're okay because you've dealt with the protection mechanisms in the space. All right, I'm gonna leave it there and I'm gonna get to my weekly session. If you'd like to see that weekly session, there'll be a link somewhere to the YouTube channel. If you're watching that full-length video, then welcome, let's get going. For those of you on the short video, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. Thank you for joining me, and good luck in confronting your defense mechanisms. There are gonna be many of them, but tune in to the Caldicott Method and you'll have a surefire way to work your way through them with ease and grace and love and compassion. It's good fun too. So, all right, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.